And it is Thursday evening, everybody, Thursday evening, and you know what that means. It is time for Bishop and the Rabbi. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Come on into the room. The room is filling up already, and it's fantastic to have you together with us. Do me a favor, as you sign in, get us your name and the city that you're watching from, if you will. It's wonderful to be connected to this global community that's involved in this incredible conversation. 2,000 years of separation between the Jewish and Christian world. And in our generation, we have seen so many miraculous things happen. We've seen the rebirth of the Jewish state. We've seen the diaspora return home to Israel from 106 nations of the earth. We have seen Hebrew, modern Hebrew, resurrected as a spoken language through the work of Rabbi Eliezer ben Yehuda. We've seen the reunification of the city of Jerusalem. We're right in the season of Yom Yerushalayim, right? Jerusalem Day in 1967, Jerusalem reunited. We see the Abraham Accords, and we see the glimmers of peace between Israel and some of her Arab neighbors who are moving in the direction of modernity and of coexistence. We're living in miraculous times, and I want to invite you tonight to be a part of that miracle by engaging in the study of this book, this incredible book that has been around since Sinai. The counting of the Omer, right? We leave Egypt at Pesach, at the Seder, and we count 50 days until we come to Shavuot, Pentecost, where the giving of the word of God to the Jewish people at Sinai. This book has been the architecture of history, and we get to study it in a live, powerful way together with the family of Jesus. We get to speak to the distant cousins of Jesus. Jesus was not a Baptist. Did you know that? He was not a Baptist. He was not a Methodist. Jesus is Jewish, and we get to interact with his family as we who are followers of Jesus learn more about the faith of Jesus. So happy to welcome you tonight to this edition of Bishop and the Rabbi. A few quick announcements before we launch. I want to invite you to join me in Israel, September 27th to October the 9th for our Awake Jerusalem tour. I am so glad to finally be back in the land. COVID shut us out for far too long. We've been going constantly since 1994, and it is time to go back. So I hope you'll join me. Go to awakejerusalem.com, awakejerusalem.com to join the dozens who've already registered to be with me in Israel, September 27th to October the 9th. Well, many of you will remember several weeks ago, we had an incredible Rabbi Seidoff from Los Angeles, one of the most powerful sessions we've had. She speaks with such quiet authority. She speaks quietly. She is sedate, but her words just carried such powerful impact on us. It would be, if you missed that one, that is a session worth going back to review, Rabbi Seidoff. And through Rabbi Seidoff, we met tonight's rabbi, and it is her very first time joining us. And we are so excited whenever we get to welcome a new teacher into our midst. Rabbi Deborah Silver, as you'll hear in just a few moments, is originally from the UK, from England, but she was ordained at the Ziegler School at the American Jewish University in Los Angeles in 2010. She co-edited 3 volumes of the Ziegler Adult Learning series with the school's dean, and also won the Wizen Prize for Jewish Ethics in 2009. She holds a master's degree in Hebrew Studies from Cambridge, England, and an MA in Theory and Practice of Literary Translation from the University of Essex, England. And as you'll see in a moment, she's very committed to the text. She's very committed to the scripture to what we're working through and engaging with it and understanding it, and maybe understanding it in some new ways that we have not explored before. But she is currently, get this, the rabbi in New Orleans. How does a nice Jewish girl go from the UK to New Orleans via Los Angeles? We're going to find out her story in a moment. She is the rabbi at Congregation Shir Hadash. Shir Hadash, and that in English is a new song. And what a wonderful name for a congregation. We've got some evangelical churches called New Song, so it's awesome. Would you give a warm welcome to our first time guest, Rabbi Deborah Silver? Rabbi, we are so glad to have you with us.
Thank you, Bishop. I'm so glad to be here.
You know, my sons and I, a few years back, we went on a trip across America. We got in a big minivan, and somehow we decided it would be fun to drive across America. And we spent 3 days in New Orleans, and we loved it. We had, is it the beignets? Am I pronouncing that properly? Beignet. Those great, like powdered donut kind of things. And we did the kind of jazz cruise on the river there. And my kids loved New Orleans. And I didn't know that New Orleans had a Jewish community, but you are there. And tell us a little bit. Let me start with this question, if I can, because it's your first time with us. So before we jump into the text, let us understand a little bit more about you. What led you towards the direction of becoming a rabbi? This is not, one doesn't just wake up one morning and decide to be a rabbi. There's a journey there. There's a process there. And if you'd be so kind, we'd love to get to know you better by hearing a little bit about that journey.
Of course. Thank you. So first of all, let me say it is lovely to be here. Let me bring to you the joy and the spirit of New Orleans, which is having its first proper jazz fest since COVID shut us down. So the streets are extra full of music here at the moment. And so far, the weather appears to be holding, which
Good.
is... In terms of my own journey, when I grew up in England, women were not rabbis. Yeah, I think that often we forget that we're still living in that time of transition and that time of change. So when I was a child and when I was a young woman, rabbi was simply not an available career option. So in answer to your question, how did I get to become a rabbi? The answer is very slowly. Very, very slowly. And the way that I think of it, Bishop, is that when a calling comes, at least to me, it came in little pieces. It's more like I like the image of a kaleidoscope. You have all of these little pieces, and they don't quite fall into a design. But if you keep turning and you keep turning, then you realize that actually there's a pattern there. And it wasn't until my midlife that I realized that the pattern that was trying to emerge was a rabbi, that I was supposed to be serving the Jewish community. So I got it piece by piece. I got a Hebrew piece. I grew up Jewish. I got a Hebrew piece. I got a love of Israel piece through Israeli folk dancing. There's a very active Israeli folk dancing community in London, and I started dancing with them when I was 16. I'm still in touch with those folks. I went to a reunion when I was last back in London, and my feet still remember a lot of what I learned when I was 16. And then a legal piece came along. I was an attorney, and so my mind was trained and wired to look at things in legal terms. And then I was a law school professor. And when you're a professor, you're a pastor, because your students have lives, and if they come and talk to you about what's going on in your life, what's going on in their lives, then you realize that there is this sort of caring quality that needs to be brought. And really all of those pieces came together one by one. And it wasn't until I was having what I like to refer to as my midlife questioning that I realized that actually these pieces had acquired a shape, and that all I really needed to do was to sell everything, leave the country, and go to rabbinical school.
So that's all. That's just that sounds positively biblical in its scope, right? I mean, that's a huge shift. Before we get to that shift, let me
Yeah,
just ask you a question, because you said you grew up, of course, Jewish.
sure.
Um, were you culturally Jewish? Was it a religious household? Where did you fall on the level of kind of observance in that regard?
We were somewhere in the middle.
Mhm.
I grew up in a nominally Orthodox Jewish household, and the denominations of Judaism, which I'm sure you've discussed
Sure.
in other programs, right? So the
Yep.
denominations of Judaism also exist in England. And when I was about 10 or 11, my family realized that it felt more drawn towards English Reform Judaism, which
Hmm.
actually is not theologically, but in many other ways more like American conservative. So we
Okay.
changed synagogues. I had a bat mitzvah in a Reform synagogue. It was still quite radical at that time for the young women. I was one of a group of 6, and we all got done together to read a few verses from Torah. Though we didn't sing them with the chant. We intoned them, and we led some prayers, some in Hebrew, some in English, and that was quite radical for the time.
Hmm.
Um, and then I ended up studying Hebrew in far greater depth at university,
Hmm.
and that's when I became the text person that I still
Right. Right.
that I am today. I just find Hebrew and the way that it works and the beauty of it, the integrity of it, absolutely compelling. Always have, always will.
And we're going to get into that in just a moment when we get into the parsha for the week. And folks, if you want to turn there now, we're going to be in a moment in Leviticus 21. But Rabbi, one other question from your background
Sure.
story. You it was just a comment, but you said, you got the Israel piece, and I think was that a trip to the land?
Oh, yeah, I've been there a few times. I've been there a few times, and obviously I speak the language as well.
But
Um,
going back to that first time, that first one or two times that you went, because it's so fascinating. I've had the privilege of I've brought about 25,000 people with me to Israel since 1994, and
it's
it is
fascinating.
always, I mean, it is an awakening moment for people. There's just something about the land, the story, the people. It's really unlike any other place on earth. What was that like for you, the first time, the second time you went, and how did that kind of become part of the catalytic force that pushed you forward to what you're in today?
So my relationship with Israel is a complicated one. Because when I first went there, the culture, the contemporary Israeli culture, is so very, very different from the English culture that I was brought
Right.
up in. So one of my most vivid memories of going to Israel and being there at the beginning was waiting for a bus. So there I am waiting for the bus with a rucksack on my back that is about the size of me, and there's a crowd of people around the bus stop. This is already strange because, as you probably know, in England we line up and you have your place in the queue and you stick to your place in the queue. Anyway, along comes the bus and everybody rushes the doors of the bus, and I had a couple of little old Israeli ladies in front of me, and uh, let me just say they had very sharp elbows, very, very close. And I remember that feeling of combined love and exasperation,
Right. Right.
that is part of the informality of the place.
Hmm.
But that was only the first experience. There have been. I agree with you that it's a resonant place. I would say that one of my most meaningful experiences there has actually not been Jerusalem, not been Tel Aviv, but it's only relatively recently that the cisterns at Beersheba were discovered. I don't know if you've visited them. You've been.
Yeah, I actually lived in Omer, which is just
Right. I
a
know.
little suburb of Beersheba. Yeah, it's
Right.
so I'm familiar, but fill people in on this.
Sure. So so Beersheba means seven wells. Yeah, we know about it. We know about it from the Abraham story. Abraham goes and lives in Beersheba, and because Beersheba is slap bang in the middle of the desert, the question was always, what wells? There are no natural wells in Beersheba. It's a lump of desert. And it is only relatively recently, I think I visited them when I was there 2007, 2008, and they'd not been open long, that they discovered that underneath Beersheba there is I need to pronounce this right, there is a system of
Yep.
cisterns.
Right.
Yeah, there are these huge
Yep.
water pits that were put there to collect water, and you can go down and you can walk inside them and you can visit and you can see the handprints in the plaster on the walls. And I remember just standing there and seeing these prints and feeling that resonance. Again, resonance is the word that I would use about Israel always. That the resonance of all of the generations of people, as I stood there, as I looked at that handprint and wondered who it belonged to, wondered who they were, wondered what they looked like, what they did, how did that handprint come to be on that wall, and how is it that I am standing there 2,000 years later, 3,000 years, 2,000 years later, looking at that handprint and wondering how it came to be there. And Israel is full of moments like that. It's got a way of kind of toppling you down into history.
Yes.
The other there's a place on the walls of Jerusalem where the successive walls of the city are exposed, and I don't even know if it's still there, but you can look all the way down and you can
Right.
see the modern wall, and underneath it you see the Crusader wall, and underneath that you see the Byzantine walls, and underneath that, and so on, down and down and down and down, and it makes you you hear echoes. Yeah, it makes you wonder about connections. It's a and if I may, Hebrew works in a very similar way.
Mm.
Linguistically, Hebrew is built on a series of roots, so words in that are shared between multiple words. So words in Hebrew echo each other and have a range that just cannot be cannot be translated into English.
Well, it's incredible, and we're going to launch into those words right now with our new friend, Rabbi Deborah Silver, joining us from New Orleans via the UK with a stop off in Los Angeles. Folks, if you can do me a favor, hit the share button right now. When you hit the share button, it helps us get the word out about Bishop and the Rabbi. And if you've not yet done so, go ahead and sign in. Tell us who you are, where you're watching from. And Rabbi, we're going to begin tonight, and we are in Parsha Emor, Leviticus 21 through Leviticus 24. And so, Rabbi, we are in your capable hands. Bring us into this text, and somehow help us understand this text. You're going to bring us into the system of cisterns of the text, right? There's
Correct.
a well in this text. There's a well.
Correct.
There are wells in this text for us to gain from and to find resonance today, right here, via the internet and being together, studying in community. Rabbi, where do you want to take us first?
Can I take us first to a blessing? I don't know if I don't know if other participants have done this, but whenever I study Torah, I always recite, there is an actual blessing for studying Torah.
Beautiful.
It's part of the morning liturgy. So we Jews recite it every morning as part of our prayers, and it points out in its wording that it's an obligation, a mitzvah, to study Torah, and the word that it uses for study is not to learn, it's not to teach, but la'asok, which is the word that also gives us the word for business. So we engage in words of Torah. We are drawn into a relationship with words of Torah. So let me say it in Hebrew, and then let me offer a translation. We know, don't we, that all translations are choices. Yes, that all translations of necessity exclude other possible translations. So the one that I'm offering is just mine. But this is what we say. We say Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Praise to you, Holy One, whose might rules the world, who has sanctified, who has commanded us to engage in the obligation of studying Torah. And we say Amen.
Amen. Amen.
So, Emor, let me back up and say that one of the things that I notice more and more, I'm sure that your audience knows that we as Jews are constantly engaged in the study of Torah. We read a piece of Torah every Saturday morning in the service from the scroll, and when we get to the end, we roll the scroll right back to the beginning and we start all over again. So the words of Torah are constantly flowing over and under and through our lives and continuing to speak to us on a weekly basis as our lives change. So I will be looking at I'll be reading this parsha once again. I am actually chanting it for my synagogue this year. Over again, as I've read it over again for many years, and asking myself, like turning a multifaceted gem in my hands, what is going to be reflected out of it at this time.
The Torah has 70 faces, like a diamond has facets, and each time you look at it, you are seeing it in a fresh way, in a different way. In one way, it never changes. In another way, it's always changing.
Exactly so. It's the paradox of Torah. That's beautifully put. And I'm so glad to hear the rabbinic understanding of Torah coming from you. I would add as well that when we look into Torah, Torah is reflective, right? Torah is like a mirror. We look into it and we see the world reflected. We see ourselves reflected. And Torah has the power to reflect ourselves back out to ourselves as well, which is why Torah study is such a powerful thing, which is why we regard it as an obligation, and it's so important. So we're in the book of Vayikra, we're in the book of Leviticus, and the more I come to Leviticus, the more I am struck by how different it is to every other book of the Torah. So take, for example, the geographical scale of the book of Leviticus in contrast, for example, to the book of Bereshit, to the book of Genesis. The book of Genesis covers thousands and thousands of miles of geographical territory. It covers thousands and thousands of years of human time. The book of Leviticus takes place all on the same day and all at the same place. There's a little flashback.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Isn't that an extraordinary way of looking at Torah? Yes. So Torah is shaped like, and I learned it from my teacher, Rabbi Raphael Zarum, who is the head of the London School of Jewish Studies in England. He learned it from his teachers, one of whom was Rabbi Jonathan Sachs of blessed memory. Mm-hmm. But when we're looking at the book of, it helps us understand why it is that the book of Vayikra speaks to us a little bit differently than all of the other books. Yeah, all of the other books have characters. They have what we recognize as plot. They have the evolution of human beings over time. And the book of Vayikra is not like that. The book of Vayikra is very static, and it speaks to us very largely in patterns. Why am I saying that? Why am I saying that? Because I believe that we need to understand that in order to be able to approach the beginning of this Parsha that is talking to us about how priests have to be perfect. If we're not very careful, we're going to look at this and we're going to say, well, priests have to be perfect people. Leaders have to be perfect people, and perfect includes not having disabilities. As soon as there is any blemish, then it renders somebody unfit to serve. And if we read the text on a superficial level, that is what it's saying. And then it goes on to say that an unfit priest cannot serve, and an unfit animal cannot be sacrificed. And in the years in which we live, in the time in which we live now, when we gain more and more of an understanding of disability, this is a difficult text for us to hold. Yeah, this is a difficult text for us to understand. Why should a community leader, if we're going to read priest as community leader, why should we exclude a community leader who is blind? Why should we exclude a community leader who is deaf? What kind of God is asking us to do such a thing? And it's at times like that that I remember that the book of Vayikra is talking to us in the language of symbol. And the way that I understand it, and I'll stress, you mentioned there are 70 faces to Torah. I'm just one of those faces. And I always, when I interpret Torah, I always interpret it simply as an offering. But it seems to me that the only way that we can compassionately hold a text like this is to read it symbolically. So now that we're in a time where there is no temple, there is an understanding that every human being has within them the quality of Kohen, the quality of priesthood. There is an aspect of ourselves, if we turn ourselves, there is an aspect of ourselves that resonates, that corresponds to this aspect of priesthood. So I would say that one of the take-homes from this text is that when we offer ourselves in service, in the same way as an animal is offered for sacrifice or a priest, leader offers themselves to serve, then it's incumbent on ourselves to offer the best of ourselves. This isn't a language that, this isn't to me talking about physical perfection per se. It is saying to you and to me and to every member of our communities, because it says back in the book of Exodus, what are we? We're a kingdom of priests, right? Everybody has this internal quality of priesthood that is there to look for. And the beginning of the book of Emor is saying to me that it's incumbent on us to offer the choicest part of ourselves, to strive when we lead, to offer ourselves in that way. And now I'm interested to know how that sits with you, Bishop.
Rabbi, you just said a lot. I mean, you just unpacked so much for us. And on one hand, I wanted to interject here and there. And then on the other, I thought, I don't want to stop the flow because it was just so beautiful, all that you shared. But I want to go back for a moment to a statement that you just made, that you made so matter-of-factly, that you stated in such a matter-of-fact way. And yet I think it's one of those things that we forget. And you said, I didn't write the exact phrase down, but you said, you're going to offer your interpretation or your understanding of it. And it even harkens back to an earlier statement, which you said that all translations are choices. That's a whole other conversation we can have. But, and I want to challenge my evangelical brothers and sisters who are watching tonight, because we don't wrestle with this issue of interpretation to the same degree that I think our Jewish brothers and sisters have engaged in.
That's correct.
And I think that we have to understand that by not interpreting, we are interpreting.
Yes, it's a
Can I
choice.
say that? In other words,
Absolutely.
by not challenging there's a tendency in evangelicalism to say, well, the Bible says, and to read what I call proof text hermeneutic.
Right.
We find one verse or two verses that support whatever our particular bully pulpit is that we're wanting to make. Go ahead.
The rabbis do that as well. The rabbis are very cheeky when it comes to
Okay.
preaching.
Oh, good.
Let me put a pin in the rabbis, and I'll come back and explain who I think they are. Yeah.
All right. But so just the fact that you said, you're reminding us that when we choose not to interpret a text, we are indeed interpreting it. We're reading it perhaps in the very narrowest of ways. We're reading it according to how our mother read it, or our father read it, or our pastor read it. And we're not deeply examining. What did you begin with? You said to study Torah is to engage. We're not engaging in that way. We're just simply allowing ourselves to be spoon-fed. And I think that the Bible wants more from us. I think the Bible wants us, as Jacob did with the angel, it wants us to wrestle with the text. It wants us to engage with the text. So from there, and we could spend a lot of time right there, to go then to your beautiful interpretation of this, reading this in symbol, that whatever this meant for that one day, that it was given to that one desert people for that moment, because that may have been what they needed in their context. Now, today, thousands of years later, you're able to read this same text and say, you know what this is saying to us today? It's not saying that if you are blind or deaf or have a limp or this or that, that you're disinvited, you're excluded. No, it's saying bring the best of who you are. Make sure that when you approach service to God, service to others, that you're not sloppy, that you're not doing it in a secondhand, non-intentional way. Bring the very best. What a beautiful interpretation of this word. So back to you.
I want to say thank you for your words just now as well. One's own words sound different when they come back through a study partner. So I'm feeling very much the presence of Rabbi Seidoff in this conversation as well. In Judaism, so a couple of things about this tradition, and thank you for opening up, because I feel it's very often misunderstood in our interactions with our Christian, and particularly our evangelical Christian brothers and sisters. And I think that there is so much more richness that we can share if we understand where we are coming from in our respective ways. In a simple sentence, I could put it this way: we prefer questions to answers. So there's a medieval commentator, a wonderful man, Rabbi Shlomo Yitzchaki. He lived up in the Alsace in the 11th century, when he became the standard commentary on the Bible for Jews. The truth is that it's probably not what Rashi wrote. What we've probably got are his students' notes that have been passed down through the generations. But it's typical that when we read biblical text, we read it with an interpreter at our side. So Rashi, from 1035 to 1105 or thereabouts, that's when he lived, is still talking to us and offering to help us interpret and supporting our own attempts to interpret as well, and to engage with the text and to wrestle with the text. And Rashi said that the text is saying to us all the time, please interpret me. Please interpret me. And when we get to a piece of the Bible that is hard to understand, then we want to hear that call. Please interpret me. Please interpret me. Now, it doesn't mean that we get to say just any old thing either, but we don't get to be sloppy and we don't get to discard. But it does mean that it is legitimate for us to ask our questions, deep questions, real questions. And I think in a world where we think of the text like that, we also think of God. We also think of the Holy One as enjoying our questions. That's very important as well. There's an old Jewish joke that says not a joke, a story where the parent asks the child when they come back from school, and it's in Yiddish. I hear it in my head in Yiddish. Did you ask a good question today? Yeah, and I think that's part of the Jewish interpretive tradition that thinks of the Holy One that way as well. So, no, did you ask a good question?
Now, let me try to ask you a good question then. All right. Let me try to ask you a good question. Because one of the things that we've found through this beautiful dialogue, right, that in and of itself is miraculous. I mean, our conversation right now is a miracle. It's a miracle that a rabbi and a bishop are having a conversation. There's so many miracles that are happening. You would say it's a miracle that you are a woman rabbi, right? Within your tradition, this is a new. So there's the miraculous is around us everywhere if we'll have eyes to see it and perceive it. But one of the things that has come from these beautiful conversations is how many times there's been a projection, and I'll just speak from my end. There's been a projection of Christians onto Jews of all the things that we thought the Jews felt or said or practiced, etc. And there's this tendency to think that Jews and Judaism is so focused on the legalism and the laws and the, you've got to keep this thing and keep that thing, and you can only be close to God if you keep kosher, and et cetera, et cetera. And in the Christian mindset, we have this thing of, well, it's by grace and it's a free gift and it's just wonderful. It's Christmas every day and we get this, this free gift. And part of what I'd like to, and I'm going a little deeper than this is kind of deep for a first time interaction. All right.
Deep is good. Yeah.
But there's something within our tradition that would say, well, if I've got to wrestle with every text, if I've got to wrestle with every interpretation, if there's got to be this, what happens to where is simple faith? Yeah. Where is the simple enjoyment of my faith in God, that simple place of trust? Doesn't this get too complicated? Doesn't God just call me to a simple, even in there's a Christian verse that says childlike faith.
Yeah.
So how would you answer that? Because I know that but you see my conundrum there. Go ahead.
Yeah, I do. It is such a beautiful and good question. It touches, I think, on the. You're not the first, by the way, to raise that question in Judaism. There was a popular movement in the 1700s. I'm not great with numbers. In the 1700s, that asked exactly the same question. That said, why are we walking around in this beautiful world with our noses in books, wondering whether if I go out on Shabbat with a filling in my tooth, I'm carrying on Shabbat? Why are we missing out on the world in this way? And that is the movement that became Hasidism. That is the movement that said, that gave us some of the greatest teachers. Rabbi Seidoff and I still study the words of those teachers who were saying, it's not just an intellectual exercise.
Mm.
And I think maybe that is the key. The wrestling with the text, you know, we come from a tradition where as soon as you say the word text, it's feeling a little bit intellectual. And we look at these texts and they're in these big books, right?
Right.
I've been rearranging my books. Rabbis have a lot of books. They're big, heavy books. Okay, and gradually, if you're not careful, that begins to leach the life out of it. But for us, the text is alive. The text is alive. One of my teachers, the voice from Sinai is continually speaking, is one way of understanding it. One of my teachers said that the way that Jewish commentators look at the biblical text is the way that a biologist would look at a leaf. Yeah. So we look at it, we're not biologists, right? We look at a leaf on a tree and we say, oh, that's gorgeous. It's a leaf, it's green, it's a particular kind of shape. Maybe we like the way that the sunshine shines through it. But when a biologist looks at a leaf, they see so much more. They know that there is life going on inside that leaf. They know that there are chemical exchanges that are happening that are enabling us to be alive. So to look at something in detail is not the same as squishing the life out of it.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
I think that's important. So there is a way of looking at text, even a text like this, as a source of wow, as a source of what Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel called radical amazement. Yeah, that even in a text like this, there is, wow, God, thank you for letting me serve. Holy One, thank you for letting me look within myself for priesthood, so that you and I coexist with no intermediary. And you see, once you're there, you know, this text can be a springboard to that. But once you're there, that's as I understand it, that's what you call grace. Yeah. And we would call that chesed. We would call that abundant, unconditional, overflowing love that is right here all the time. All the time, all the time. So we have to be, I would say we have to be, a text that questions us is inviting us. It's not requiring us. Now, of course, human beings are human beings, right? And they like, you know, we tend to like structure, we tend to like rules, we tend to like books that have page numbers in them and footnotes and so on and so on. But ultimately, what we're doing when we study Torah is we are connecting ourselves to the source of life itself, the Zohar, the one of our great mystical books says that this is the blueprint for everything. God looked into Torah and created the world.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So,
Folks, if you're just tuning in, we're having an amazing conversation with our new friend, Rabbi Deborah Silver, and she is from Shir Hadash Synagogue in New Orleans. So I can just imagine that there's some jazz going on somewhere in the background there almost all the time, and
yeah.
and it's just lovely to have this time together. Hit the share button, folks. That helps expand the conversation. It helps invite new people. This is already proving to be just an amazing, amazing program. We are in Emor, Leviticus 21, and we've taken just as we've allowed the conversation to take us into some beautiful places. But Rabbi, I want to make sure that we get to the kind of goals that you have for the text itself. So thank you for putting up with my bunny trails. But where do you want to take us next in this beautiful study?
May I just say that your bunny trails are wonderful, and that we believe in the Jewish tradition that chavruta, the process of sharing ideas about a text, is one of the things that God wants us to do. Yes, so this is holy work that we're doing right here, and I feel that very deeply, and I'm immensely, immensely grateful for it. I just wanted to loop back briefly before we go to the end of the Parsha, and to say that in the same way as music is the lifeblood of New Orleans, you can think of Torah as being the lifeblood of the tradition. Yeah, that when we think of text, again, I want to move us away from the idea of it being booky, and move us towards the idea of it being a living thing.
Beautiful.
It's constantly in interchange with us. Yeah, so it's not, to me, it's not wrestling so much as a listening. I think that when we do reduce, when we desiccate it, when we dry it out, then we are perhaps not doing it the best service that we can do it. It's
Beautiful.
it's alive. It's alive. Yeah. So let's talk for a minute about this, about the end of the Parsha.
Okay.
So it's, and I'm very tempted to say I'm on page 732 of the book. Yeah, but I shan't. I shall say instead that I'm at chapter 24, verse 10. And this strange and disturbing human episode. I said before, there's not a great many human episodes in the book of Leviticus.
Right.
There's this one, there's the dreadful episode of Aaron's two sons, Nadav and Avihu. But generally speaking, Leviticus lacks what we might call human interest. But when it comes along in the book of Leviticus, it really makes up for lost time. And the human interest is really dramatic. And so it is here. So you have a young man who comes out, Vayetze, says the Hebrew, somebody whose mother is Israelite and whose father is Egyptian, and they get in a brawl. And within that brawl, this person of mixed parentage pronounces God's name in blasphemy. Vayikov ben ha'isha ha'Yisraelit. It's got a sense of sort of nailing. Yeah, the blaspheming. It's got a sense of piercing. Yeah, going somewhere where it shouldn't belong. And there's a lot of that pattern in Leviticus. All of these boundaries, all of this belongs here, this belongs here. When stuff that belongs here gets into another place where it doesn't belong, then we're in trouble. So now you have the holy name being put in a place and a context where it doesn't belong, in a brawl between two human beings. And so the situation is brought to Moses for resolution. And the resolution is that this does not belong, that a boundary has been crossed, and therefore the blasphemer is taken outside the camp. That's important. Another boundary is crossed. A rule is declared that when this kind of breach happens, it's an irrevocable breach. And that is reflected by the death sentence. Yeah, there are 36 different offenses. I think it's 36 different offenses in the Torah that attract the death sentence. The rabbis, the post-exilic rabbis, were very concerned about taking away the life of another human being, and they essentially legislated away from the death sentence ever being able to be pronounced in real life. But here, on the face of the text, here we have the death sentence for blasphemy because there's been a violation here, is what I would say. There's been a violation. And as ever, when there is a violation, it behooves us as human beings to ask, well, how did that happen? How did that terrible thing happen? How did it come to pass? And the rabbis of the Jewish tradition, by which I mean the rabbis from the destruction of the temple onwards, maybe immediately before, but the early rabbis of the Jewish tradition, and still rabbis today, look at this situation and say, how can a human being reach such a point of pain that this terrible, irrevocable thing can happen? And the rabbis look at the text and they say, well, hold on. First of all, this person has no name. What do you mean, has no name? Yeah, everything has names. We have a whole book of the Torah, the book of Exodus in Hebrew is the book of names. How does this person not have any name? Yeah. And what is the parentage of this person? Israelite on one side, Egyptian on the other. We know the mother. The mother is called Shlomit. We don't know the Egyptian father. And so the rabbis look closely at the text. Remember the biologists with the leaf saying, well, the
Right.
answers are in here somewhere. We
Right.
just need to work out where they are. And one version of these, of the answers to these questions that are arranged is that this is the son of the Egyptian taskmaster that Moses killed. This Egyptian taskmaster, when the Egyptian taskmaster was not taskmastering the men, used to go into the tents and have his way with the women. And this child is a product of that not marriage. So
Oh my goodness.
isn't it amazing?
Mm-hmm.
So this child who violates is themselves the child of violation.
Mm-hmm.
Rage begets rage, anger begets anger. What can it mean? What can it mean for a human being to be in such pain that they are prepared to push away the Holy One in their lives? Well, it must be because they came from pain. And so you end up, do you see, with a much more compassionate reading of who this young man is, with a reading that does not push aside the irrevocability of this act, which does not say, no, this act was justified,
Mm-hmm.
which says, wait, when you see something as extreme as this, there's got to be more to it than that. And that approach, that holding of the text with inquiry, with compassion, that I do believe is required of us and continues to be required of us as human beings, not only in our encounter with this living stream of wisdom. If we're going to be enlightened by the text, then we need to let it in. And that means letting in these episodes that are extraordinarily, shall I just call it abusive?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, this was the child of an abusive relationship. And that's what happens. These are the long-term effects of
Right.
tyranny, of abuse. And then you see, we say the name of his mother, Shlomit, coming from the word shalom, must be ironic. This is
Mm.
true peace.
Mm-hmm.
This is
Mm-hmm.
not true peace. Yeah, that's just one understanding. Because this is such a difficult episode, difficult episodes multiply what are called midrashim, interpretations of the kind that I'm presenting this
Mm-hmm.
evening.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Absolutely amazing. You know, that it brings me to the phrase hurt people hurt people,
Yes.
right? We hear that, and that when we have unresolved pain, when we have pain that is not processed and given to God for healing in whatever form that takes. That might be through therapy, that might be through prayer, that might be through study, that might be through music. Ideally, it's through all of those things. Then it continues to fester and it becomes toxic. And yet you're giving us here a reading of this that has such empathy and such compassion. And I all the time view our world and think to myself, we're living in such polarized times where it seems that the media on all sides has made it their goal to cause fear and cause division and cause toxicity in society. And we need to daily make the choice to put on lenses of empathy and of compassion and of understanding and of care and of concern, because those who we so quickly judge, if we had had their life story, if we had had their challenges, if we had had their pain, who knows but that we could have ended up precisely where they are and in their situation. And I've never heard this story read in that way, and you do us a great gift bringing that to us. Rabbi, I can't believe it, but our time is drawing to a close. I wish it was not. It has flown by.
It really has.
It's
It
been
really has.
a delight and a joy. I know that people are going to want to keep up with you. They're going to want to study more with you. Do you have any social media presence? Do you put anything out? How can they keep in touch with you?
I don't really. I tend to.
Well, you should. Today's the beginning.
I'm sorry. I'm showing my age. You can definitely Google me. I do have one Facebook page,
All
and
right, that's a
I'm
start.
always happy to take questions in messages. May I finish with just one thought,
Yes.
which is, so far as I am aware, to me, one of the most marvelous things about this interpretive tradition is that so often we don't know the name of the teacher with whom it began. I believe I'm right in saying that the version, the interpretation that I gave you, it was taught by a rabbi whose name has been lost. But we continue by our questions, by our addressing the text, and by our sharing this source of wisdom with each other. We continue to carry teaching forward. And aren't we all in the end striving for wisdom? Aren't
Proverbs
we all
says,
in the end?
get wisdom.
Yes,
Wisdom is the main thing.
yes, yes. She's
Yes,
out there on the street corner.
that's right.
She's
She's
still there.
crying out. That is it.
She's still there. Bishop, thank you so very, very much from my heart. And thank you to everybody who is on this call for sharing Torah in this way. I feel as if I've been given a gift.
Well,
I'm
you
very
you have you have given us a gift, and we are going to give you a gift because it's your first time. So since
Oh,
it's your first time, in the mail this week will come our official Bishop and the Rabbi mug.
how
And
fantastic.
and you'll be one of about 50 rabbis across the country who has our official Bishop and the Rabbi mug. It has been an absolute joy and pleasure and honor to meet you. Would you consider coming back and teaching us again sometime?
Vice Bishop, yes, I'd love to.
Well, we would be honored and thrilled to have you. Folks, thank you for tuning in. It's been another incredible episode of Bishop and the Rabbi. Tomorrow night, Friday night, we'll tune in at 6 p.m. for the Shabbat Brachot. We'll be lighting the candles and doing the Hamotzi and the Hagefen tomorrow night as you increasingly honor Shabbat in your midst. So tune in for that. And then, of course, Tuesdays at 12, we have our weekly Torah Tuesday program at 12 noon. So we will see you there for that. Until then, everyone, keep praying and working for the peace of Jerusalem. Thank you all. God bless. Bye-bye.
Thank you. God bless.